joy, 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 ever new joy, joy.
This feels like it's got nature devas around.
Yeah. Yeah, they've been invited every day.
How long have you been here?
I've been here since about 1991, maybe.
Okay.
So over 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell me about the inspiration to start it all.
This?
Yeah.
What started it all was that in 1990, the fundraising project, as we called it then, was called Master's Mission. And what that was putting in the gardens at the Expanding Light. And there was to be the Temple of Divine Inspiration down where the Pavilion of Gratitude is now. Rosanna was involved in that, a tall, narrow business. And paths, lights on the paths. So Tim Shantz was the landscape designer, and he was the boss. And they had me come over. They wanted something for me to do, so they had me come over to the Expanding Light to help with that. And I grew up on a farm. I like gardening, plants, anything outdoors. I love it. And so that's what I was doing. And then they hired me. They called it Expanding Light Maintenance. And so I was supposed to help put that in and then stay on and take care of it, but also be the maintenance man. And then, so that was a wonderful, happy time for about half a year maybe. And then the lawsuit started and my job disappeared because all resources had to be consolidated. And so I love the work, so I just started doing little jobs around, and little landscape jobs, and I like building rock walls and putting in flower beds and paths, things like that. So I did that. I made a few dollars here and there, and I noticed that there was nothing to work with at the Expanding Light. I think they had a wheelbarrow, and so I had bought a mower, a nice mower that you could drive around. And so I'd mow the lawn, and then I would go out and I'd mow other little areas in the community and make a few dollars, and gradually earn more money and started buying more equipment. And then my sister gave me a job landscaping her place in Colorado, and she gave me the money I needed to buy a small tractor. And then I went every summer to her place for a month or so and worked on her place until I paid off the money she'd loaned me. And then I had a little tractor. And then I started using that at the Expanding Light to mow and to start clearing. Great deal of resistance to that because we all liked nature and we didn't want to mess with it. I didn't either, but I'd been through the 1976 fire and I had a very healthy respect for it. When I went through that fire, I would walk from the Crystal Hermitage over to here, to the publications area. That's where everything was. We all walked to work, and everything was black. And there was a kind of a heart-rending crunching sound in the forest, and it was the beetles finishing off the trees that the fire had burned. Everywhere, millions and millions of them. And there's something in me shifted because I grew up on a farm. My father had a very strong sense of land ecology, taking care of the land. You don't leave a mess, you take care of things. You clean up the mess, you get rid of the dead stuff, you plant fresh, you just take care of it. And it was overwhelming. There was no money, there was no equipment, there was nothing to work with. And when I got here, then it started seeming a little bit possible to maybe start to do something. And I had tried in the 80s when I was in Sacramento. Every week I'd come up making off with the center's 4 horsepower Toro push mower. And I'd go up to Brindavan, where I lived in a little trailer, and I'd kind of rear it up and bring it down on the brush, and rear it up, bring it down the brush. And at the end of the day, I'd take it to Trimurti, and he'd sharpen the blades and look at me. What have you done to this poor machine? So then, but here, it became possible to do more. And the lawsuit went on and on and on and on, so I never did have a job again. Really, they gave me a little bit, but just to keep me around. But mostly it was earn money, spend money on more equipment, and then spread out into the community. And one of the jobs I was given was people would hire me to mow around their home. And so I'd go and do that and make a little money. And then it occurred to me that for the amount of money that it cost a few people to hire me once a year to mow their particular little patch, we could do the whole community if we did it all at once in one big sweep. So I kind of did that, and then we started doing that, mowing the whole community. And yeah, so it went from there.
I'm recalling Swami talking in the book Cities of Light about his vision of park-like community, and at that time there was so much brush all around on both sides of the road that he just took it for granted that that's the way things were. But did you lock into that vision and think about, because I know you have been a huge part of that, making that happen.
Very much so. The idea of a park, my father's, the little farm I grew up on, it was a small farm. He was actually a businessman, but he came home from work and we took care of the land. And we mowed everything every year with the old style sickle bar mower. There was a family that came. We didn't do it. My father didn't like machinery. But we took care of it. We baled. We grew our own hay. We grew alfalfa for the cows and mowed all the grass hay for the horses. And chickens, there was a whole thing going on. We grew all our own vegetables and had flower gardens and beautiful fruit trees and the whole thing. And he trained us. We had chores from an early age. I was up at the crack of dawn milking the cows and cleaning out the stables and all that before school every day, and then again after school. So we were raised to take care of things. Every summer he would give me a project that would last about 3 months, the whole summer. I remember once painting the barn. It was a beautiful old all oak barn, no nails, all pegs. And I'd paint it with a brush up on a ladder. It'd take me all summer. Or we had a long driveway that was made out of clinkers, because we had a coal burning furnace. That's what we had, a coal chute and coal furnace. And the clinkers are what's left over after the coal is burned. And so that was one of my jobs. I'd spread it on the driveway, and then gradually the driveway would turn into that little, with 2 ruts and a high center and high sides. And so I would go out, little Jimmy with his pickaxe, and chip away at it. And it would take me all summer, and I would get the driveway nice and smooth and level. So I think among other things, it gave me a health respect for what equipment can do. My little body doing this thing I could have done in maybe an hour with a proper tractor. Took 3 months. So, but he trained us. He trained us to work and to take responsibility for the land and to clean up any mess and just to be responsible for it. So I would rather at the time have been hanging out with my friends playing board games or something. But then here, Swami said that, and I understood perfectly I could see it perfectly what he meant, because we'd done that. Our little farm was a mess when we got it. It was full of stumps, and blew out the stumps with dynamite. It was quite a scene. And I could see the forest, and I could hear it suffering. And so I just started poking away at it. And we were struggling along. There wasn't money for any proper equipment, and I didn't really know what I was doing. So gradually I learned, and I never minded asking people how to do things. So I developed a lot of friendships with people who knew this stuff, and were glad to share it. And so we started, and then it was just mowing at first, but that was something. And that was before the real climate change, which started not that long ago, when really it was just we had regular droughts, and there was not enough, the forest was suffering, everything was so dry, and it became a real serious hazard what fire was. It wasn't like that before. And even though the community burned down, it wasn't that big a deal. It wasn't a raging 3,000 degree monster. It was just a little fire. And it was quite fun, actually, for those of us who were here. Those of us who stayed. And so, yeah, so I stayed with that. But it's a community, and there's as many things going on as there are people, and they're all equally important. And so part of the lesson of being here is to learn to have respect for everyone's perspective and not just sort of smash forward with your own. And we learn that by trial and error, and by going too far and then becoming a bit humble and backing up and trying again. And at first there was tremendous resistance to it because it was messing with nature, as people saw it. Why is he killing the trees? People would say sometimes. And there was a lot of misunderstanding about that. Up until about 2004, when there was an arson fire. A fellow who, for whatever his personal reasons, was chucking flares, highway flares, into the forest all along 49 and Tylerford Road and Oak Tree Road. And the fire department was running here and there. And if he'd planned it, which he may have, he did a good job because they ignored the one that was threatening Ananda till it was a little bit late. And so the fire came tearing up the hill right here, went right by, but I'd mowed the area so it didn't take out this. It sort of went around and up the hill, and then it leapt across the road and burned up a awareness cabin. And I had my bulldozer, and people came, and it was okay. Divine Mother blessed us and protected us. The fire miraculously stopped at the top of a ridge. The fire people thought it would be a 1,000-acre fire. It just looked like it. And then it went up to the top of the ridge to the west, right below Meru, and right off the dam. If you go straight south from the dam in front of Lotus, it stopped there. And we were able to take care of it. But that changed people's attitude dramatically about the value of the kind of clearing work I was doing. And there got to be general support for it. It's work that's painful for people because it's, in the short term it's destructive, in the long term it's beneficial. There's a lot of dirt, a lot of dust. The poor people, they would forget that they wouldn't have their windows closed when I was crashing around, and all their beautiful housekeeping would be destroyed for a huge dust removal project. So there was that collateral effects of it all, and just the noise and the intensity of it. It's hard to work with. But now people are very supportive and kind, and I think we're all looking at it quite the same way. We've entered, in a way, a new phase now because the fire danger has become so catastrophic that various large organizations are overreacting, and there's a massive tree removal going on, thousands of trees, just beautiful old heritage oaks. Wherever there are power lines are coming down by the hundreds. And it's just, it's stunning, and it must be very shocking to Mother Nature. I pray for Mother Nature a lot. It's just don't leave us, great devas, stay with us. This will end, and we'll, just like after the fire, we'll come in, we'll try to help. So, yeah, there's a wonderful cooperative spirit about doing this. Mother Nature has gotten so out of balance through our nationwide mismanagement of the forest. The policy of total suppression of fire has caused this tremendous overgrowth of brush everywhere and invasion of non-native species, and the suffering of the natives. And it's gotten so far out of control that anything we do to try to moderate the situation has a destructive side to it. So there's control burn, but it's burning, you're hurting things. And there's mastication, you're grinding up things, you're destroying habitat for lots of little creatures. The best we can hope for, and what I try to keep in mind so that it doesn't become discouraging, is that in the longer run we're trying to return nature to a place where she can take care of herself again. And with regular fires as part of healthy forest life, and with a drastic reduction in the fuel load so that when there are fires, the collateral damage is minimal.
Let's harken back to how did you get from where you grew up to Ananda?
Yeah, I grew up in Kentucky on a little family farm, and went away to college and went away to graduate school. And I was in college and graduate school for about 10 years in all. And right at the end of that period of time, I had read some things, especially in graduate school, that were very soul awakening. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Thomas Carlyle, both of them were very inspiring to me. Thoreau, the Transcendentalists, and different, Tolstoy, lots of things that were pointing toward Master's teachings, but without any direct connection, at least that I was aware of. And then I started teaching full-time in North Carolina. That's where I was in graduate school. And different things would happen that pointed me in the direction. I remember a wonderful woman that was a teacher in the college I was working for. She was a Baha'i, and she came in one day, and she had such a radiance about her, and she invited me to their service, and I didn't accept, but it stayed with me that there was something going on other than this strange thing that I was doing. And then there was an Egyptian holy man that some friends of mine knew, and his name was Wadi Salih, and we went out on a hike one day, and coming back, he just, for no particular reason, turned to me and said, "It's time for you to do something about your life." And then he just went on about his business, and there was no judgment, just a statement, just informing me of something that, and I remembered that. And then one afternoon I was in the little cafe at Duke University, which was right there near where I taught, just sitting there doing nothing, and suddenly someone called out across the room, "You should go to a yoga class," he said, for no particular reason. And I said, "Oh," and so he told me where one was, so I went. And it was not Master's Path, it was Kundalini Yoga, but it was, I was in the fairly polluted state of that era in the 60s and early 70s, and it had a wonderful effect. Lots of breathing and strong movement, and I felt 100% better almost immediately, and cleaned up my act and started doing that, and stayed with that a couple of years because that was what was there. And then that fell apart because I reached a point with it where I realized that this was not the guru I'd heard about for me, and that I simply couldn't follow any farther. I'd gone as far as I could. So I departed. It was not a clean departure. I didn't know what else to do except just to go away. So I went away and went back to Kentucky. Prodigal son returns. And my father, in his kindness, gave me a job remodeling a little cabin out in the country, because they had two homes at that time. They had a town home and a country home. And the way they worked it out, they had a very sweet marriage, my parents. And when they were in town, that was my mother's house, and she cooked. He was not allowed in the kitchen. She took care of everything. And when they were in the country, it was Dad's kitchen. He prepared the food and served it, and they had it worked out. It worked great. And it was all during their married years, since we grew all our own food, he would come in with bushel baskets of produce and sort of plop them down in the kitchen for my mother to deal with. So, a 19th century lifestyle in the 20th century. And so there I was, all alone, out in the old family home. And they were in town. And I had this little cabin. We used to have a couple would live there and help around the place in exchange for being able to be there. But it was currently empty. And so I got to work, and I had a few carpentry skills because I'd done some work in carpentry. I was in the union, actually, the comical episode. And while I was there, one night, in my perspective, all the failure of my attempts to be in the Yogi Bhajan spiritual path kind of crowded in on me. And I'd left that under a cloud. They were not pleased and let me know in no uncertain terms that this was a really bad thing to do spiritually and that the consequences would be dire. And I didn't know, so I was frightened, spiritually frightened. And one evening it came to a head. I was outside, out in a lawn area, outside the little cabin I was working on. It was a very dark night, and I felt the sky pressing in on me. I felt that I was going to suffocate, and this dark energy was pressing, and there was nowhere I could go to be safe from it. It was an astral energy, an astral dark energy. It was the curse that had been put on me, I suppose. And I had no defense against it. I didn't know what to do. And so I mentally prayed, which I didn't really know how to do, but I just prayed for help. And as I did so, I saw in the sky, high up overhead, an image that I'd seen when I was at a 3HO ashram in North Carolina. I'd lived in that for a couple of years while I was teaching. And it was a picture of Yogananda. It was his image in the sky. And I just looked at it. I suppose I was seeing it with my interior vision. I don't know that it was actually there. And then I knew what to do. And the darkness lifted, and I was okay. And the next morning, at the crack of dawn, I was on my way into the public library because I'd seen that book, but I hadn't read it. It was at the ashram, but I hadn't read it. I actually opened it up, and I just wasn't ready, and I couldn't read it. It didn't make any sense to me. And I was at the library about an hour before they opened. And I went in and wandered around. I didn't know the name, anything. And I didn't ask. I just wandered around the stacks, and went right to it. And there it was, the autobiography of a yogi. And I, just like Swami says, I clutched it and took it home. And the next 3 days and nights, I hardly slept. I just read the books. And I felt so happy that I'm home. This is my friend, and he's going to save me. He's going to take me with him. I just felt that he would. And soon after that, so I was working, I was doing that, during the day, putting up sheetrock and all that sort of thing. And there was my father's den in the old house. It was an 18th century house, quite a beautiful old house, log house. The original home was all stone, like 2-foot thick stone walls. The one whole wall was a fireplace with hooks where they'd cooked in the fireplace in the early days. And that was my father's den. And I was out there attempting to meditate with no instruction, just from reading the book. So I was sort of thinking about the autobiography and trying to do whatever I thought meditation was. And I became aware of a portrait on the wall, and it was a portrait of my great-great-grandfather, Henry Van Cleve. And he had been a slave owner in Marion County, Kentucky, in south central Kentucky. And when he was 30 I think 32 years old, just about the age I was then. He and his friend took one of their slaves out into the barn, and they were going to whip him for being disobedient. That was the culture of the times. So that was before the war. And he was doing that, and the slave, whose name was Jim, which is my name, interestingly, broke free. He had a knife in the hay. He killed my great-great-grandfather with the knife, and he seriously injured the other man, who managed to subdue him, and then of course he was hung, and the usual southern nightmare took place. And there was great-great-grandfather in that portrait, and I realized that he was still with us, that he was what's called an unhappy ghost. He had been caught in the prime of his life in a horrible crime in both directions, both his and against him, and he was just stuck. And so, not knowing anything, I prayed for him and just asked Master to bless him, and Master did bless him, and the energy shifted, and he was fine. He was free to do whatever he needed to do. So that was Master, I thought. So I have to do this. So I wrote the book. This was before Ananda put out the original. So I wrote the organization, and every day, 3 times a day, I'd go to the mailbox. There was a box about a quarter mile away at the end of the driveway, and I'd walk out there, nothing there. Of course, the mail only came once a day, but I kept checking in case it showed up. This went on for 3 months, and I kept working. Nothing. And then finally one day there was an answer. Very institutional, very polite. Obviously my request it was one of those enthusiastic, youthful requests of, I've read the autobiography, this is my guru, can I come immediately and join and all that? And so this long wait followed by, no, do not come. Stay right where you are. And so I was pretty much plunged into despair because I didn't know there was anything else. And then I felt what I suppose was guidance to go back to North Carolina and see my old friends in the ashram, because that's where I'd seen the book the first time. So I went back there to North Carolina, and there was the book, and there also was a 33 RPM record of Swami Kriyananda leading the yoga postures, which I played, and I didn't know who Swami Kriyananda was, and there was also a little bitty book called The Road Ahead. And so I picked up that book, and I turned it over, and on the back it said Yogananda, and it said community, and I thought, I'm going there. And I determined not to make the same mistake of writing ahead and asking permission. Then I'm just going to show up. So within a few days I had everything buttoned up, and I started hitchhiking. And I caught a ride to New York City, of all places, and then I caught a ride from there to Boulder, Colorado. And it took quite a while. It was 1974, and the Midwest was in a serious drought. It was like right out of John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. I'd see these sad-looking farmers in their faded overalls standing out there in this pitiful fields of corn that was only about half as tall as it should have been, and all kind of brown and sere, and it was gruesome and hot, and sort of like passing through the furnace on the way to the garden of fulfilled dreams. And in Boulder, I became sicker and sicker myself on the way across country, and among other things, I developed a blinding headache so that I actually couldn't see, except I could tell light from dark barely, and I could make out very faint, fuzzy shapes, but I couldn't really see what was going on. And so my ride let me out there and departed. And I got directed to a free clinic. This was in those days. And they said, "What's the matter?" I said, "I have a headache." And they said, "Oh, we can't help you." So I left, and there was a little park nearby, and I went out and found a large bush in the shade because the light was very painful. And I crawled up under the bush and just lay down and closed my eyes and hoped that, I don't know what I hoped. I just couldn't do any more. And not long passed, I don't know exactly, but I heard very quiet, very gentle voices, a man and a woman, quite young. I couldn't really see them, but I could feel their quality and hear their voices. And they helped me up, and they helped me away. And I don't know if we got in the car or what, but next thing I knew, we were at their home. And they put me down on a couch, and the woman made me some kind of smoothie. And I drank a little bit, and then she put her hand on my forehead, and my vision came back, and all the pain went away, just instantly. Wow. And I said, "Where did you learn to do that?" And she said, "Yogananda." And that was Master. And then they were right on Highway 25, which is the north-south that goes through Colorado. I think it goes all the way down into southern states below. And they took me right out to the road and stood with me, and the first car that came stopped. And they explained the situation to him, and the man, I think it was the man, I just still was pretty disoriented. The man took me in, and he took me to my sister's house in a place called Avondale, Colorado. Took me right to her door and let me out. And then my sister took me in and fed me orange juice for about a week. And then I continued hitchhiking out to...
Now wait, did he know where your sister...
I had an address.
And you given him the address?
Yeah.
Okay.
I knew that because I'd written her.
Okay.
I may have even had a phone number. I don't remember. But whoever it was, and I don't know who those people were that took me in, and I don't know who that man was. I was just being sort of taken care of by perfect strangers. And then my sister was not a perfect stranger, and her very kind husband took me in, and they were not well off. They were impoverished students and beginning teachers. And then I got back on the road and hitchhiked the rest of the way out across the north. And I'm glad I rested, because hitchhiking across places like Wyoming is not for the faint-hearted. There were nothing but trucks, all of which had 1 or 2 rifles in the rear window and the cowboy hat on the operator. So it was the rides were few and far between. Took quite a while to get through that. And Salt Lake City was quite a place to get through also. And there didn't seem to be a lot of positive feeling toward the hippie-looking sort. There I was with long hair and a backpack, and the classic heading for California, worthless person. And right at the border of California, a Mercedes stopped, driven by a nice woman, and she helped me in to the car, or opened the door for me, and I got in, and she said, "So I'm going to Ananda. Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, that's where I'm going also." So she drove me right to the meditation retreat, and I got out, and there in the office, which is the small dome, I don't know if it's an office now. It was a home, but maybe it's an office again or something. Anyway, that one. And there was Dinanath. He was managing, he was minding the office. And on his desk was an enormous tray, it must have been 3 feet long, of some kind of coffee cake, just covered with melted butter. And he was having some. And he offered me some. And I was
very glad to have it. And so that was my introduction to Ananda. Dinanath and coffee cake. And almost immediately, the manager then was a fellow named Chandidas. Very nice, high energy guy. And he put me to work right away putting shingles on the domes. And Vidura was there at the same time, and he was putting mastic on the temple, and I was putting shingles on the common dome and the office dome in which Dinanath had been. So that was my job at first.
What year was that, Prakash?
That was 1974. Yeah, I showed up August 5th, 1974. I must have headed out from North Carolina, it must have been mid-July or even early July. I think it took me a month to actually get out there with being sick and recuperating and so on.
So what was the first time you met Swami Kriyananda?
And that was not immediately. I had finished putting the shingles on the common dome, so that must have taken a month. And I was putting shingles on the little office dome, and I was up on a ladder, pretty high up on the ladder, putting the very top shingles on. And Swami came along in his orange robes, his ochre robes. I think he'd been at a meeting of the staff, and he was coming back from that. And he walked by the dome, and he looked up at me, and he smiled, and I pretty much lost consciousness and fell against the dome. Fortunately, I was fairly well propped, and I didn't slide off onto the ground. But he just smiled in such a gentle, loving, accepting, welcoming way. Didn't say a word, just as though he'd always known me and he'd always been my friend. And I had the same feeling that I had reading the autobiography. This man is my friend, and he will always be that, and he will show me the way. And that was meeting Swami, and then Satya, who was maybe the first member at Ananda. Swami was the first, but he might have been the second or close to it. And he taught me the basic techniques. And Satya led all the sadhanas, the postures, meditation, everything. And so I learned all the postures and the affirmations. And he taught me the Hang Sa technique and the Om technique. And then there was a Kriya late that August, and I didn't apply because I thought I should wait. I'm actually glad I did, but Swami told me later he would have been glad to have given it to me that pretty much right after I'd come. But what did happen there early was that I was allowed to go to what was the kind of final gathering of the membership class of that time. And there were quite a few of them. I suppose Durga and Vidura must have been in that. Most of them had been doing it for a long time. And I came in, it was right at the end, so I had only been there a few weeks when it took place. Might have been a month or more, might have been in September, I'm not sure. And Swami gathered us all together in his dome, which was all there was then. That was well before Crystal Hermitage. And he spoke, and he asked if there were any questions. And I've never been a person who asked questions, but somehow I asked the question. And the question was, did you know right away that Yogananda was your guru? And Swami answered, and I don't remember a word he said. So often the case when he goes very deep. And but as he spoke, I felt that I was experiencing in my own soul what he had experienced when he met Master and when Master accepted him as a disciple. And that was the confirmation. And I knew there was just no going back ever from that point on. I wish I had a recording of what he'd said, but I'm sure I've heard what he said many times in other contexts.
So, fast forward, I know at Crystal Hermitage, when that was being developed, you had taken on the stairway building, and tell me what you recall about that.
Oh, that was and so soon after, when I was at the meditation retreat, I started taking the 14 steps, and Devi would send them out. It was quite funny because she would send them out when she thought the person was ready, not on a rigid schedule. And I just loved it because she was always right. And she waited longer before sending steps 11 and 12, the anatomy of yoga, which are fairly rough sledding for the amateur. And I think in one other case that happened. So I'd been through that, and then I wintered over at the meditation retreat. And then as soon as I could, I talked Chandji Das. I bought a little trailer, and I talked Chandji Das into pulling it down with the retreat truck down to the monastery, which was right below Swami's dome, down that steep slope. And I remember Chandji Das saying, I don't know about this. I can't guarantee anything. We might wreck it any time. But he got me in, a little place far down the hill with the other guys. And then, so then, of course, our joy was to serve Swami, because he was right there. And he didn't come and lead meditations for us or anything, but he was there, and the dome was there, and there was a lot that needed to be done. And so we loved to bring him firewood or anything, any excuse. So I remember making him a little concrete step, just a little semicircular thing about 3 feet across, and it was actually a nice job. And just doing little things for Swami. It was such a joy for us. And then it was just a steep, rutted hill coming down from the upper level down to the dome. Quite a good ways. I don't know how far it is exactly. So I thought I'd make steps. So every day I had a bow saw, and I'd go out and I'd cut a pole, maybe 8 feet long, maybe 6 inches in diameter, and I'd bring it down. Then I had a pick and shovel, and I'd dig out 1 step. It took a while doing it all by hand, and then I'd set the log in and stake it in place, and that'd be 1 step. So I just I didn't really have a plan. I just worked my way down the hill, and then trying to keep the same amount of drop to each step. So of course the width of the step varied, and then sometimes I had to have a longer place to make it work out. And so that kept me near Swami for quite a long time. But that was every day I'd do 1 step, so I don't know how long it went on. And yeah, it was just so sweet to be able to do things like that.
What else do you remember about being with Swami, or things he said?
His way of teaching us was so unique to each person. And he would give us opportunities to serve him in ways that we might be hopelessly incompetent at. I remember once he said that he wanted me to make him some soup, and I'm a standing joke as far as cooking goes, or anything to do with food. I've never had any real interest in it, and so I rooted around. I went around to all the little monk cabins and asked if anyone had any soup. And someone finally produced a can of Campbell's tomato soup. So I took it back up to Swami, and I opened the can. I was very nervous. Opened the can and warmed it up, and found some little bowl and put it in, and that was the beginning, middle, and end of my cooking experience for Swami. I think it was warm enough, and he managed to drink it. And then we were putting paneling inside his dome, and no one had any money, including Swami. And so we would get these boards called Pecky cedar. It's like the remnants of the good wood, and it had all these holes in it. It's very sort of rustic, and so we'd get a lot of that, and then we were tacking it up or screwing it in to the inside of the walls, making paneling. And so, although I had some construction experience, it didn't occur to me that speed and efficiency was the point. I thought the point was just to be there and get these boards in with many prayers and blessings applied to each board, so that it would be just in the right foot. So I was creeping along with a little hand slot screwdriver, slowly getting these screws in, and Swami walked by and said, "Wouldn't it go more quickly if you had an electric drill?" And that always stayed with me, and I think in a way that led to this rather large and complex tractor empire that I'm now overseeing. That there are better ways to do things than the slowest possible, most tedious and laborious and inefficient way. So that was my lesson in that. And then another comical one was I was never equipped for things like the runny nose. And so it would always, and Swami would take the monks with him to various outings. Usually several of the monks would go with him in his old Air Force Chevy who would go up to the meditation retreat from the dome to give Sunday service or class or whatever, and often several of us would go with him. And I was walking up the hill with Swami and a couple of others, and my nose started to run, and I was kind of swatting it with my sleeve, and I obviously didn't know what to do. And so Swami said, he just sort of gestured, he kind of tapped my arm and said, come with me, was the body language. And so we turned to the side of the little parking area right up above the dome into some shrubbery there, and he leaned over and he said, and he put one finger on the side of his nose, leaned way over, said, indicating that I should do the same. And then he blew and indicated that I should do the same. So I blew my nose in that way, and then he turned and did the other side. And it was, that's only Swami would have. So after that, I made sure that I had a handkerchief or something with me. I've puzzled over that forever. Just that he would take care to do such a kind and humorous and just delightful thing that, of course, would stay with me for the rest of my life. And then there was the Night of the Monks skit, was another memorable one. And Bharat, as a very good-humored and creative soul, he created a little skit for the monks to do. We would have this every year. I think it must have been Christmas time. And there I have a picture of a lot of the old monks involved in it. But for Ram and I, we were still monks, Ram was and I was. And I was very thin, probably 110 pounds or something like that. And he was an enormously muscular, athletic, former 49er football player. And so Bharat informed us right before performance time that our job was to do a skit called Yoga Postures for Self-Enlargement. The 14 steps at that time were called the yoga postures were called, I think, the Yoga Postures for Self-Mastery. And so this was a play on that, Yoga Postures for Self-Enlargement. So what we were to do, and Ram and I were out getting ready for this in the little bathroom, and Ram was saying, I don't know if I can do this. I just don't know if I can do this. This is embarrassing. And I said, well, let's just go. It'll be all right. And so we went out, and Ram was off stage. And my job, I was the 90-pound weakling. That was my role. So I was just in a little kind of a breech clout thing, and very skinny and all kind of hunkered over and wiping my eyes as though I'd been crying recently. And Bharat came out and said, what's the matter? And I said, well, they kicked the bullies, they kicked sand in my eyes. And he said, well, how would you like to kick sand in their eyes? And I said, well, yeah, I'd like that, in my wimpiest voice. And he said, well, what you need is yoga postures for self-enlargement. And so then I would come out and with my arms up in the half moon pose, and the affirmation is strength and courage, fill my body cells. And I would do that, and each time, strength and bodies, fill my body cells. And then each time, and then a sign would come out that would say 1 week later, and then 2 weeks later, and each time I would be stronger. And then at the end, a whole curtain came out, and then a sign came out and it said a week later or something, and then the curtain was pulled aside, and Ram leapt out with a glistening black body, just shining with light, and these huge rippling muscles, and snarling, and leapt out at the audience, and all the nuns in bright yellow were right in the front row, and Swami was right behind them, and they all the nuns shrieked and fell back in horror. this monster attacking them from above. He was right on top of them, just a few feet away. And so then everything calmed down and other skits took place. And we all went home and, got our clothes back on and so on. And the next morning was Sunday. That was Saturday. And the nuns, of course, had quite a bit to say to Swami about this, that they felt it was undignified and improper and this and that. And so the next morning, Sunday service. So as usual, Swami was going to go up, be driven up in the old Chevy, Air Force Chevy. And I was walking along the road, and then Swami came along behind, and with two people, one person driving, I think it was Nitai and Keshava. And they stopped, and I got in the back, and so I was sitting right behind Swami. And we drove along in perfect silence, and I was still sort of cringing and trembling over the whole thing. And then very quietly, Swami said, Prakash, I hardly recognized you behind that massive physique as you were walking along there. And I didn't say anything, and no one else said anything. And that was what he had to say. And I heard later that when people went to him and complained about, how outrageous it was, he said, yes, but it was good fun, wasn't it? And that was his attitude. To him, it was all, we were just learning, we were just having fun. The joy was the point of everything, and that was joyful and a fun sharing. And he picked up the whole theme of it and made it a light way of lovingly and kindly just bursting any remaining attachment I had to being, because I was always very unhappy with being a skinny kid. I wanted to be big and muscular. It was important in the 50s when I was growing up, 40s and 50s. And he just sort of removed all that attachment about the body and all that stuff. It just went away in that moment. And I suppose that's what he was doing, because that was the effect of it.
Your directing of the apprentice program is legend. So I'd love to hear your memories of that and how all that came about.
That started the very first fall that I was there. So pretty soon after I got there, something had been happening before with Shivani. It was a garden. There was a garden apprenticeships. And they stayed up at the meditation retreat, and they went down all together and worked in the garden with Hanel in those days. And Shivani was very involved, and others. I think Devi was there, and Anandi, and most of the old timers, I think, had some service in the garden. And so they informed me that I was going to be in charge of I guess they called it the apprentice program, or maybe I called it that. I don't really remember where the name came from. But it was the apprentice program. And I'd come to Ananda with a great love for that. I loved the guild system in the Middle Ages. I'd read a lot about it, and I just loved the idea of being trained in some specific skill by some old master, and then just doing that your whole life. I was in England in 1980, and I met a person whose whole life was repairing grandfather clocks. That's all he did, and he had an apprentice with him. And the apprentice just wanted to go to the pub and, have some beer, but I just thought that was just a heavenly lifestyle. So that was my idea about the apprentice program, was that, and the 14 steps. The 14 steps, that was my guide. there weren't 150 books in those days. There were a few books. The Path hadn't been written. There was the Sun Sign book. There was Letters to Truth Seekers. There was the Road Ahead. There wasn't a lot, and there was 14 steps. So the meat of the teachings were contained in the 14 steps. What's now called the Art and Science of Raja Yoga. And I wanted people to study them. And I felt that if people studied the 14 steps, it would change their life, and it would heal them of anything. I was quite committed to those lessons. And so my idea was that people could come to Ananda, they could learn a skill, and if they stayed on, they could use that skill and have employment. And if they didn't, they'd still have a skill that they could use or supplement what they already did. But the important thing is that they would be here and they could study the 14 steps. So that's what we did. And I put out these, what now would be just laughable advertisements, just little, maybe 20-word, little printed, almost like something in a personal column in a newspaper. Just a little, maybe 20 words, and it said, apprentice program at Ananda, yoga, meditation, and apprenticeships in gardening, dairy, etc. Cooking, carpentry, I don't remember what they all were. And lots of people wrote back with pen and paper and actually came. So the very first session was in May of 1975, and 12 people showed up, and it snowed. And there they were out in this thick woods, heavily canopied with snow on the ground and dripping off the trees on their little wet tents. And we had a little farmhouse down in the entryway in which everything was crooked. There were no level surfaces anywhere in that building because it was sinking. It was built the old way, where you just put down some field stones and then you put your support members on that, but the stones would gradually sink and then everything would tilt in different directions. And but it was a sweet old farmhouse, and our yoga postures room was the what would have been the living room. It was probably 12 feet across and 14 feet long, something like that. It was not very big, and it had a little fireplace in one end. So there was no heat, no electric heat or anything like that. And so I got a little fire going in the fireplace, and then I was having a little class for them who'd just come. And I was sitting up at one end, and I've always been pretty warm-blooded, so I was fine, but they were not fine. They were very cold and kind of wet, and they were all jammed together, all 12 of them, all jammed together as close as they could get without catching fire to this pitiful little fires. And if you've ever been around a fireplace, they don't give very much heat, and it's only straight out. So it doesn't warm the room, it just warms you right where you're aimed at it. So they were there, and they were glowering at me the whole time. So that was our introduction. And but I think people had a good experience. In a lot of ways, a lot of members came through that. That was really what we had in those days. It was that or nothing. And so a lot of people came. Purushotama and Kirtani came then. I don't remember which year, but Trimurti came. Shankari, Julia Beinhorn came. Michael Fellows, who was just here, he came, I think, in 75. I think he came that first year. So Ramurti came, and Sita. And anyway, I could go on and on. Lots and lots of people. And they would have their apprenticeship. And they would, the first year, people called the Summer of Love, because we just loved each other, and there was a great deal of hugging and kindly feelings for one another, and it was the Summer of Love. And we had no staff, really, and we didn't even have a cook. We had a cook for one day, and then the cook was siphoned off to the school. to be a teacher, I think a preschool teacher. That was my tree. And so just whoever felt they could cook became the cook. And it would change from week to week. So one week we'd have a fruitarian fanatic and we'd have only fruits. And the next week the macrobiotic people would move in and we'd have only ginger miso soup and brown rice and things like that. So, and I didn't eat any of it. I was permanently fasting and having a little watered down apple juice and not much else. And just meditating hours. I was meditating 8 hours a day and 14 hours a day on the weekends. So I was very happy. I was very blissful and just felt love for everyone and felt like everything was fine. And if they wanted to eat, that was everything was fine. Fine with me. And all I did was talk to people all day long. And but it was on the physical plane. We've come so far that there was one little bathroom for all these people, and this little ratty kitchen, and then people were in their tents all over the place. And then we'd have the yoga postures. We did a full sadhana, 2-hour sadhana twice a day, and they were supposed to come, but in that first year I never required anything. But we'd do that, and then we had class every Thursday night. We'd have kirtans, and different people would come and give special talks, and lots of things going on. And then they were learning things. They would be in the garden or the dairy. Raghu came, and he was the dairy apprentice, I remember. So, and then the second year, and at the end of each year, we would have these community circle meetings. And everyone would sit in a circle and they would comment about what had happened that year. So there were a great many rather unfavorable comments about the apprentice program, about the lack of discipline. And Swami himself had come with Seva to I think it was a Mexican feast. And it was kind of a farewell Mexican feast. So we were all, of course, being the summer of love, we were all sitting in a circle, a huge circle. There must have been 40 people there. And we were having this Mexican food, and Swami came. And his comment to Seva, which he reported to me later, was, no one seemed to be in charge there. And Seva said it to me, and I was just devastated. I just thought, oh no, I failed Swami, and I took it very hard. And then we had the meeting, and they pointed out that there was no discipline. We needed discipline. And Swami had said, no one's in charge. So I thought, okay, I've got to be in charge. We're going to have discipline. So the second year became the year of discipline. And we attracted, maybe because of the energy, we attracted a great many of rather muscular young men. I remember at one point there were 80 people, 80 apprentices. And many of them muscular, and they'd be doing the yoga postures in the morning with their shirts off and their brawny chests exposed. And then we had two quite southern ladies, there's Shankari and Julia Beinhorn, with all these guys. It was just priceless. And I remember Julia coming to me once and said, it's just too cold. It's too cold. I'm too cold. And she was so distraught. And Shankari was very quiet and humble, but she was just staying with the course. And I remember once, then the famous event of that year was the mutiny. The apprentices mutinied against the discipline, because I had them up, I don't know exactly when, but I think I got them up at 5 o'clock. And we had sadhana at 6 or something like that. And then there was, or maybe even earlier. I know I got there because I was disciplining myself too, and I had been ordered to gain weight by Swami, so I was gaining weight, and I would run, I'd put on my boots, and I'd run from the monastery over to the apprentice village, which was about 1.5 miles through the woods, at 1 a.m. And then I would do Mahamudra for an hour. I'd energize, then I'd do Mahamudra for an hour, and then I'd do Kriya for an hour. And then I'd energize some more, and I would keep on like that until it was time to ring the bell, which might have been at 4:30 because we were having discipline. And so I'd ring the bell and everyone would stagger out onto the, it was up in the meadow, because there were no buildings, no structures there of any sort. So we were just spread out on the meadow, and I would lead them in the energization and the yoga postures, and then we'd sit to meditate, and I would immediately fall fast asleep because I was, of course, completely exhausted if I didn't keep moving. But I don't think anyone noticed, and then so we'd get through the sadhana, and then they'd go on about their day. And after a while, a young fellow that worked for me, and a woman who was one of the nuns was supposed to be overseeing this, so I wouldn't let undesirable people in. And because there'd been some pretty strange ones that had come in the first year. It's my opinion, my attitude was that Master's teachings would heal everyone, so we should accept everyone, and they would be healed. And they would find freedom and light. Seemed obvious to me. So some pretty wonky people came in. And I remember one woman took off all her clothes and was running around the community screaming. And then she went in the temple and hurled her waste products at the altar. And so this was considered to be over. Jyotishan Seva came and talked to me about it, and I said, but she'll be all right. She just needs to stay here longer. And they were just very gently explaining to me that some people, this path is they're just not ready for it. And I don't know that I ever understood it then. I certainly understand it now. But that second year, we were, of course, in the other direction. And so the nun that was overseeing this decided that she needed to take matters in her own hands. So she organized, through this fellow that was supposed to be my assistant, organized a mutiny. And so they went out there maybe in the evening before, and the bell was an oxygen tank, or propane tank, or I think it was oxygen tank. And it was hung between a tripod of poles, and you whacked it with a mallet of some sort, and that was the bell. And so I tied the oxygen tank up against one leg of the tripod and I guess they got all their old clothes and wrapped them around, then taped it all up. And so I came jogging over after my usual morning routine of running over and energizing and doing all these things, and I went up to ring the bell at 4:30, I think it was, and the bell was inoperable. So I knew what to do. I remembered that kitchens have butcher knives, so I went down to the kitchen and I found a butcher knife and came up and hacked all this mess off, and then rang the bell and continued ringing it until everyone showed up. And they all came out. I think there might have been 80 people then. There were a lot of people, 60, 70, 80. And they all finally came out, kind of grudgingly, and we had our sadhana. And then I called a meeting afterward. First I went over to see Swami, which is very unusual for me. I don't think it's the only time I ever did. And I said, Swami, is there anything you want me to be doing differently at the Apprentice Village? And he looked at me, and I knew he knew everything. And he said, no, everything's fine, thank you. And so I went back, and I called a meeting, and everyone was there. There was a little garage, and that was where we had our meeting. And I felt Swami's blessing, so I just said, this is what we're doing here. If you don't like what's happening, you don't have to be here. I'm glad to refund your money, and you can just come see me, and we'll take care of it. So I just looked all around, and I said, is there anything anyone would like to say? No one had anything to say. And then later, one of the women whom I know, she actually lives in the neighborhood, and I see them once in a while, said, I don't mind the discipline, it's just the attitude you have of being a drill sergeant that I mind. And I remembered that because, of course, she was right. That is the attitude I had. That was how I interpreted the idea of discipline. So that passed over. Only one couple left, and we went on about our business from there. And I think it just cleared the air, and people realized they didn't have to be here. If they were here, this was what was happening. And I think Jeannie came on at that time, Jeannie Shantz. She came with Trimurti, and I think they were apprentices at that time, and she was a wonderful influence. She was the balance that I needed. And we had a wonderful meeting. I forget what we called it in those days, but kind of a planning meeting where you write down ideas and all that. And I saw that if Jeannie were involved, we'd have a well-balanced, proper apprentice program that third year. And I think we did. I think it came, we had more reasonable times. We had just a more human approach, more sort of creature comforts, and I think all around a more balanced situation. There was one of the more extreme things that the year of love attracted this poor woman that ran around with no clothes on, and the year of discipline attracted a fellow who was paranoid schizophrenic, and he took a dislike to the power pole right outside the apprentice village, and he took an axe to it and was going to chop down the power pole. And I wasn't there at the time. I was in seclusion, of course, having my lengthy meditations. And so Jeannie's solution was to get everybody into the temple and all chant Om. And so it must have worked, because the power pole remained standing. I don't know exactly how it all played out. I've got to ask her about that sometime. But I know that was her solution, and darn if it didn't work. And so those were the kind of the two pivotal points in those two things. And then after that, so that worked well. But what was frustrating to me was that people weren't there long enough to go through the whole 14 steps. Because that was always the one thing I wanted to happen, was that people really study the 14 steps, and then their life would work. That was my attitude. And but we couldn't do that, because people would be there for 1 week or 2 weeks or a month or 2 months, and it would be whenever they came. And so it took us, we'd get through the 14 steps twice in one season, because the season was 6 months long. So then I had the thought of having a yoga teacher training course. And I asked Seva if it was a good idea, and she liked it. And I didn't really care about yoga teaching. I just thought it was a nice way to present something people would understand. And then they could have a skill. But then the point was that they'd study the 14 steps, and they'd have the blessing of that. So we started doing that. And the way we did it was 3 months long. And they would be half the time in the yoga teacher training course and half the time in being an apprentice. So they'd learn gardening, and they'd also learn to be a yoga teacher. And I liked that. It spread out enough so that they could really go deeply into each lesson. And then that evolved from there into more concentrated ones, because at that point they wanted someone else to do the apprentice program. They thought I was just doing too many things. And so they had me do just the yoga teacher training course, and someone else did the apprentice program. And so we started doing the yoga teacher training at the meditation retreat, and the whole thing shifted at that point. So that was that. Yeah, it was, that was the early days. Swami would take us not knowing anything and let us do something, and just let us make all our mistakes and make a huge mess of it, but always putting the energy out. The guidance was always there if we could hear it. Mm-hmm. And then just helping us learn and pick ourselves up out of the mess and move forward and try to do it better. Mm-hmm. It was a very wonderful, a very blessed time of growth and service.
I'd like to ask you, you've mentioned a couple of times the amount of meditation you did. Has meditation always come easily for you?
It has it's never come easily. I've always had a hard time meditating. And what I realized in those early days was that the reason I had trouble meditating was because of the body. And so I determined, and it must have come right out of some Kali Yuga monastic life, previous life, was I immediately understood that the way to get the body under control was to remove food. And so I started fasting. And at first I did Master's cleansing diet, and I did the ones that were recommended. They're fine. That was all very good and very health producing. But it wasn't really helping my meditation, because you spend so much time in and out of the bathroom that it's a little hard to go very deep. So I started doing more extreme fasts, and I remember Purushottam and Kirtani every once in a while. They had some sort of vehicle, I think, and they would bring me cases of these gallons of apple juice. And I had some cayenne pepper and some olive oil, and I would dilute the apple juice half and half with water, add a little olive oil and some cayenne pepper, and that's what I'd live on. And then I think my more serious meal, I'd have half an avocado with a little tomato and mush it up, and have that for protein. And and so I did that, and after getting through the initial cleansing, which took about a week, then the body became very cooperative, and I hardly noticed it at all, and I could sit for long periods of time. And I didn't have Kriya, I just was doing Hangsa. And I would practice the Hangsa. The body was not interrupting me. My mind would become very calm. It was very quiet in the monastery. There was no electricity, no humming refrigerators or anything. And out in the woods. So it was a very peaceful place to meditate. And I would meditate for, it got up to 8 hours a day when I was working. And then I would take Saturday and Sunday off and meditate 14 hours. And then I started taking Thursday off also and meditating 14 hours. And my weight went down and down and down. It got down to a little over 90 pounds at the low point. And I was just very happy, very loving that whole time. That was that first year, in the first year. And Swami got wind of it, and as always, he let me play it out. He just let me play it out until it was necessary to intervene. Then he summoned me. He had one of the nuns come down. They're very good at summoning people. And she summoned me. Swami wants to see you. And so I went up, and he turned to me as I walked in the dome, and he said, "This is ridiculous," and turned away and walked back into his office. And I knew what he meant. And so I went back to my little cabin and feeling like, uh-oh, what have I done? And then I was summoned again, but very gently this time. Someone came to get me. "Swami wants to see you." So I went back to see him, and Swami said, "I think you look better when you weigh about 160 pounds. And then he went on with what he was doing. He always treated me that way. He would say something very quick, and then he would stop, because he knew if he talked too much, my mind would start working, and I'd start messing with it, and it wouldn't work. So then that was coincided with the year of discipline. So I said, all right, I must weigh 160 pounds. So I got out the original lessons. I forget what they were called. And there was one on gaining weight. And he recommended certain foods. I think bananas, cream, butter. I forget what it all was. But all the ingredients, I just got them all and ground it all up and made this sort of rice pudding kind of thing out of it. And I ate 2.5 quarts a day. I'd have a quart for breakfast, a quart for lunch, and a pint for supper, or maybe the opposite. And I gained 40 pounds in about a month. And I got up to about 145 pounds, and the apprentice program was over by now. The year of discipline had ended, and I was doing carpentry, because now I was going to be strong and do this work. And weigh all this, have all these pounds and things. And it came on so quickly that I thought, oh, there's nothing to it. I'll just keep eating my glop, I called it. And then I'll weigh 160, and then I'll have obeyed Swami, and he'll be pleased with me. But at about 145, the body just shut down. It would not process any more food. And so I went to Swami and I said, Swami, I'm so sorry, I just can't seem to gain any more weight. I'm at 145. And he said, that's fine. That's fine. You've done fine. So he let it go at that, and some of it drifted away, but some of it stayed. But it never went down to previous lows. So that was Swami's training.
I want to ask, how does it all seem to you looking back?
Oh, looking back, I suppose we all just wish we'd caught on quicker and responded more fully, as Yogananda said, more and better. It would have been so good, so nice to have done more and better, and to have understood more quickly, and not to have, for God's sake, have to teach him how to blow my nose. And But I realized looking back that the details never mattered. The particular lessons to learn never mattered. They were all of them vehicles for the transfer of energy. Just as the question I asked him about knowing if Master was his disciple, I'd put myself in a questioning, receptive mode, and so he could give me energy, and he did. And when I would push something far enough that he just had to step in, and I knew that he was stepping in, then I would again become receptive and open, and he could say something and help me. And I think that's how he was with all of us. Each one so different. I remember one fellow that had terrible headaches, one of the monks, and I saw Swami talk to him about this when he had a headache once. And he went to him, and he just was like a mother. He said, oh, you poor thing, I'm so sorry. And he just bent over backwards with this motherly concern. And I kind of think that the fellow's headaches went away. He maybe just needed that sort of intense, concentrated nurturing at that moment. I don't know. I don't know what's behind it, but I'd see him be so different with different people. With me, he was always very abrupt, very quick, and then a little bit later, very gentle, very much a quiet friend. I remember once he spoke to me about relationship problems, and he did it in two ways. First, he had me come in, and he was married. That was when he was married to Parameshwari. And I walked in the dome. He'd summoned me to come in. This was, early 80s. And Uma was his companion, support person. And she was there. She greeted me in, and we stood in the entryway, and she explained what was happening to me. And there in the dome was Swami, pacing back and forth. There on the couch was Parameshwari in a flood of tears. There on the couch was an enormous stack of books. And Swami was walking back and forth, back and forth. And then Parameshwari, still in tears, went upstairs, which was the little bedroom place at that time. And Swami went up and talked to her, and then he came back. And all the time, Uma was giving me a blow-by-blow explanation of what was happening. And she said, Swami and Parameshwari are discussing their sleeping arrangements because he's concerned that too much physical proximity will produce undesirable consequences. And that these are the books that Swami wants Parameshwari to read and to master as part of her role in being kind of the mother of the community. And to Uma, it's just very matter of fact. And meantime, this drama was going on. Well, I had just come in to see him from a broken relationship feeling very bad about it, and actually being the one most responsible for the problem. And Swami showed me this, that things aren't always smooth. It's all right when things aren't comfortable. It's okay when things don't work well. You just work with it. You just stay with it, and you work with it, you deal with it. But he showed me this, and it's like just the compassion of this man that would simply present his life to me in that way. And then, and so that was the hard hit. He didn't say anything to me at that time. I just was there, Uma talked, and then I left. And then later I was there, some days later, and Swami walked up to me and said, and all he said was, "It's just that I've been at this longer than you have." And then he left me with that. And of course he was talking about human relationships and all that sort of thing, all that. That was his way of teaching. And I remember another occasion, and when I would feel that I'd failed him, I would go into a tailspin. I would become deeply depressed, and it would go on a long time. I could not pull myself out of it. And I remember one occasion, I don't know what the precipitating factor was, but maybe some of that same sequence of events. And he was giving a talk. That was when the Expanding Light had just begun, and there was really no temple, functional temple. So when he would speak, he'd speak in what's now the dining room of the Expanding Light. It was just bare floors. It had a roof, but it wasn't much. And he was going to give a talk. And I think the talk was on something like self-acceptance, and which was precisely what I was not able to do at that time. And he knew it, and he knew what I was going through. And he also knew that I just was so caught in it that I couldn't even come. And he sensed where I was. I was out in the woods, thick forest in those days, what's now behind the Temple of Light. It was thick brush and woods and camping spots for campers. And he sent someone out to find me and have me come to the talk. And so I did, and listened to the talk. And he was telling me how to be with that. And I don't know that it took very quickly, but I was there, I was receptive. You know, he had just pulled me out of my despair and sat me down psychically, and then talked. And of course he was talking to everyone, and I remembered that, the compassion of that.
Any final words or final thoughts?
It's been so wonderful these last couple of years, especially very recently, to see the new generation that's coming in, that's taking over, that are just stepping up to carry Ananda forward. All of my generation, I'm almost 80, and a lot of us are, there, and we're still working full time, but it's time. It's time for the leadership to move forward. And I just see them, they understand these things so well, and we fought so hard and so long to learn anything. I feel like they've just gotten it so quickly. Maybe the magnetism here has just gotten so strong that people were on a higher level and were just drawn into that. I don't know. But I'm very impressed with what I'm seeing, the people here, and it's very complex. It was so simple in the early days, and now it's much more complex, and all the online and the computer and the worldwide work, and so much going on, and they're just rising to the challenge. And working with great respect for the older generation, but also, and learning from them, but also taking the lead, making the hard decisions, and moving it forward. Very inspiring. I have great hope for the future.